I appreciate each and every one of you taking the time to listen. Let me know where you're tuning in from. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. But enough of that. Let's get started. It all began with something small. A whisper. A tiny, insignificant detail that seemed harmless at first. But that's the thing about little details, they have a way of burrowing into your mind, festering, growing into something you can't ignore. That's exactly what happened to me. My name is Ethan, and this is the story of how my life came apart in ways I never saw coming. For years, business trips had become part of my routine. Fly out of Los Angeles, close a deal, then head back home to Belle, where my wife, Claire, would be waiting. Or at least, that's what I thought. Before leaving, I gave her my full schedule, flight times, meeting details, everything she needed to know. It wasn't just a habit, it was about trust. We had been together long enough that our lives ran like clockwork. I always knew where she was, and she always knew where I was. Or so I believed. By Thursday morning, the deal was sealed, signatures on paper, and I was suddenly pulled into an urgent issue at one of our East Coast offices. It all happened so fast I barely had time to think. Sitting on the plane, I used the in-flight phone to call Claire, eager to tell her I'd be coming home early. But when I called her office, the receptionist told me Claire wasn't available. Strange. Even stranger. Her assistant, Jennifer, was also nowhere to be found. Jennifer was practically glued to Claire's side, managing her schedule, screening calls, keeping everything in order. The only times Jennifer wasn't around were if Claire was sick or if Jennifer had personal matters to deal with. Neither of those seemed to be the case. I dialed Claire's cell next. Straight to voicemail. That gnawing feeling in my gut tightened. Something felt off. When my flight landed in Seattle at 6:35 p.m., I expected to come home to a lit-up house, dinner on the table, and Claire greeting me with her usual smile. Instead, I walked into darkness. No lights. No Claire. By 8 p.m., unease had turned into full-blown worry. I paced the living room, calling her again. And again. Still nothing. Finally, at 9:20 p.m., my phone rang. Claire. Relief flooded me, until she spoke. Ethan, I was starting to worry something had happened. I called your hotel, and they said you checked out. Are you okay? Something in her voice was off. Too measured. Almost rehearsed. And then it hit me, she wasn't where she was supposed to be. A slow, cold realization crept in. She claimed she had been buried in meetings all day, swamped with legal paperwork. She mentioned John, a colleague who had apparently helped her smooth over a tough situation with the Melrose account. According to her, he had practically saved her career, and she was grateful. Grateful? Gratitude doesn't mean vanishing for hours. It doesn't mean unanswered calls. It doesn't mean secrets whispered behind closed doors. When I hung up, a sickening feeling settled over me. This wasn't just about tonight. The signs had been there all along, I had just refused to see them. The weekends when she would disappear for hours, claiming she needed space to decompress. The way she had grown distant, her mind always somewhere else. The sudden fascination with expensive jewelry. The odd charges on our credit card that didn't quite add up. And yet, the worst part wasn't the affair itself. It was the lies. Claire had promised loyalty. She had sworn she loved me. But here she was, giving herself to someone else while keeping me in the dark, pretending everything was fine. And I had been blind. How could she look me in the eye and tell me she loved me when she had already given another man a piece of herself that was supposed to be mine alone? That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house seemed louder, every shadow stretched too long, mocking me. I lay there, replaying memories of us, the laughter, the intimacy, the dreams we built together, and wondered how much of it had ever been real. Had Claire truly loved me? Or had I just been convenient, a placeholder until something, or someone, better came along? By morning, despair had hardened into anger. Anger at Claire for betraying me. Anger at myself for not seeing it sooner. And anger at John, whoever the hell he was, for thinking he could take what didn't belong to him. Because if I learned anything that night, it was this: forgiveness isn't free. If Claire wanted redemption, she'd have to earn it. And if John thought he could walk away unscathed, he was dead wrong. The next morning, fueled by a mix of rage and determination, I decided to dig deeper. After finding his contact information in Claire's office Rolodex, I grabbed the keys to our dark green Explorer, the car we rarely used unless we were heading to the mountains or towing the camping trailer. I left the Mercedes in the garage. No need to be obvious. I drove straight to Claire's office in Belle, scanning the parking lot for her gray BMW. It wasn't there. My suspicions tightened their grip. With a heavy heart, I punched John's address into the GPS Medina. Of course. A high-end neighborhood, tucked away among towering evergreens, where the rich played house behind tall brick walls. As I rolled past his place, my eyes caught sight of Claire's BMW, neatly parked beside the garage, hidden from view. I pulled over, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached. There it was. Proof. My vision blurred as anger, heartbreak, and disbelief fought for dominance. For a long moment, I just sat there, willing myself to breathe. When I finally wiped my eyes and drove off, I had no real destination, just an urgent need to get away before I did something reckless. By the time I reached Bellevue, it was nearing brunch. I stopped at a small cafe, sat down at a booth, and ordered tea and a Belgian waffle, though my stomach wasn't interested in food. Every bite was slow, every sip deliberate, as I turned over my next move in my head. By the time I left, I knew I needed to see for myself if Claire was still there. I drove back by John's house. Her car hadn't moved. A wave of nausea rolled through me. For the next hour, I drove aimlessly, looping past his house one more time. Still no change. Her car remained parked in the same spot, standing as a silent witness to everything she had done. By the time I made it home, my body was drained, my mind a storm I couldn't quiet. The house felt too big, too empty. I wandered from room to room, restless, lost. Dinner didn't seem worth the effort. Instead, I grabbed a few snacks, fruit, soda, anything to dull the gnawing hunger that had nothing to do with food. At 9:45, just as I was getting ready to call it a night, my phone rang. Claire. Her voice was light, almost playful. I miss you. The bed feels so empty without you here. The bed? I forced my tone to stay neutral. Yeah. I know how lonely a bed that big can feel. There was a pause. What do you mean? She asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. I let the silence stretch before brushing it off with a quick, nothing. I love you. And then I hung up. Lying there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I realized Claire wasn't coming home. Not tonight. Probably not for a while. My mind spiraled, imagining every detail of what she was doing, where she was, who she was with. Scenarios of revenge played out in vivid detail, each one more satisfying than the last. By 7 a.m., I was wide awake, ready to face the truth. I was done playing the fool. I needed answers, and I needed them now. Sunday morning crawled in like a storm cloud, thick with tension. I sat in the living room, shades drawn, lights off, just waiting. The clock ticked past 10. Then, finally, I heard it, the familiar hum of Claire's BMW pulling into the garage. Moments later, the kitchen door creaked open. She was home. And she had no idea what was coming next. She stepped inside, carrying a small overnight bag, her sleeveless red blouse catching the dim light filtering through the curtains. The necklace I had given her on our 3rd anniversary gleamed at her throat, a cruel reminder of what we once were. She looked refreshed. Almost glowing. Like a woman returning from a rejuvenating getaway, not one sneaking back into her husband's home after spending the night in another man's bed. But her calm facade shattered the moment she noticed the mess I had left behind. Dirty dishes piled in the sink, unwashed glasses cluttering the counters, and a teapot humming softly on the stove. Her eyes darted around the kitchen, scanning the space like an intruder who wasn't sure if they had set off an alarm. Slowly, she moved, checking corners, eyeing the closed drapes that framed the patio doors. Then she reached for the fireplace poker. That's when I leaned back in my chair, taking a slow sip of my tea, letting my presence finally register. "Oh my God, Ethan. You scared me." Her voice wavered, guilt laced between the cracks of her surprise. I kept my expression unreadable. "When did you get back?" My tone was flat, drained of any emotion. She hesitated, then sank into the wingback chair across from me. "A couple of days ago." I nodded slowly. "Why didn't you call? Where have you been staying?" I tried calling Thursday afternoon, but you weren't home. And Jennifer wasn't at the office." I set my teacup down, letting the silence stretch between us. She squirmed under the weight of it. Finally, I spoke. "Claire, make me understand what happened." Her hands flew to her face, fingers trembling as fresh tears spilled over. "Ethan, I love you. This had nothing to do with you. With us. Please try to understand, it was just something I felt I had to do." I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Cheating on me has nothing to do with us. Are you serious?" My voice rose, disbelief cutting through the room like a blade. "You gave yourself to another man, Claire. Did you beg him to take it? Was it meaningless to you?" She sobbed harder, shaking her head. "No. It didn't mean anything. I'm still me. Nothing has changed. I love you, completely. I swear, I'm yours." I clenched my jaw, anger and pain coiling tight in my chest. "And yet, you gave yourself away like it was nothing," I spat. "How many nights were you with him, Claire? Just those 2? Or are there more?" She crumbled, collapsing in on herself, body racked with sobs. Hours passed in thick, suffocating silence, interrupted only by the distant laughter of children playing outside and the rhythmic ticking of the mantel clock. But my mind was already moving forward. Over the next few days, I devised a plan. I wouldn't lower myself to their level. I wouldn't lash out in some impulsive fit of rage. No, I would be patient. Precise. Using my professional connections, I dug into John's life. It didn't take long to find his weaknesses, he had plenty. A gambling problem he kept under wraps. Mounting debts. A professional reputation built on nothing but bluffs and bravado. And then, piece by piece, I took him apart. Anonymous tips triggered investigations. His unethical practices at work came to light. Within months, he lost everything: his job, his reputation, even his marriage. As for Claire, I gave her a choice. Leave quietly. Or stay and face the kind of humiliation she wouldn't recover from. She chose the former. And just like that, she was gone, vanishing from my life as swiftly as she had betrayed me. Months later, I stood on the terrace of our now empty home, staring out over the horizon, realizing something profound. Revenge hadn't healed me. It hadn't erased the pain. But it had made me stronger. Life moves forward, even when your heart is in pieces. And sometimes, the greatest act of vengeance isn't destroying the person who wronged you. It's reclaiming your peace. The afternoon was unseasonably warm, the kind of heat that clung to your skin and made the air feel heavier than it should. I stood there, gripping the railing, as if it was the only thing keeping me from unraveling completely. Behind me, Claire's sobs echoed through the glass doors, a haunting melody I knew I'd never forget. Each cry was a fresh wound, twisting deeper into my chest. But I didn't turn back. I couldn't. Not yet. I replayed our last conversation in my head, dissecting every word, every excuse, every pathetic justification. It had nothing to do with you. She had said it over and over again. And maybe that was the worst part of all. But how could it not? Intimacy wasn't just about the physical, it was emotional, spiritual, a bond meant to be shared with one person and one person alone. And now, that bond lay shattered at my feet, broken beyond repair by her choices. What stung the most wasn't just the betrayal itself, but how casually she spoke about it. She hadn't done this out of spite, hadn't plotted to hurt me with some calculated cruelty. No, it was worse than that. It was convenience. It was gratitude. John, this smug, self-important bastard who had saved her career during the Melrose account disaster, was apparently someone she felt indebted to. And in her twisted mind, giving herself to him had been a form of repayment. The idea was so absurd, so pathetic, I almost laughed. Almost. But beneath the anger, beneath the gut-wrenching humiliation, something else began to surface. Pity. Not for her. For myself. How had we drifted so far apart that she no longer valued what we had? When had our love become so fragile that she could toss it aside so easily, without even stopping to think about what it would cost? These questions gnawed at me, hollowing me out from the inside. Claire sat hunched in the wingback chair, arms wrapped tightly around herself like she was trying to keep from falling apart. Her tears had slowed, but her breathing was still uneven, shaky, interrupted by quiet, broken gasps. She stared at the floor, unable, or unwilling, to meet my eyes. I turned from the terrace, my jaw tightening. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely audible. "I never meant to hurt you." I stopped mid-step, exhaling sharply. Then, my voice cold and edged with disbelief, I asked, "Then why did you?" She flinched, her shoulders trembling. "If you never meant to hurt me, why didn't you stop yourself?" I pressed, my voice cutting through the silence like glass breaking. "Why didn't you think about us before you gave yourself to him?" Claire swallowed hard, her fingers twisting together in her lap. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice cracking. I thought I was doing the right thing." I let out a hollow laugh. For both of us? I repeated, incredulous. How, exactly, does screwing another man benefit me? I shook my head, disgust curling in my stomach. You don't get to rewrite reality, Claire. You did this. And you sure as hell don't get to pretend we can just sweep it under the rug and move on. Trust doesn't work that way. She nodded slowly, her face pale, drawn. I understand, she murmured, barely above a whisper. I know I messed up. But I'll do whatever it takes to fix this, to make things right between us. I crossed the room, dropping into the chair opposite her. Leaning forward, elbows on my knees, I searched her face, trying to find some sign of sincerity, something deeper than these surface-level apologies. Do you even realize what you're saying? I asked, my voice quieter now, but just as sharp. You can't fix this overnight, Claire. This isn't a flat tire. It's not a leaky faucet. This is our marriage. Our life. I shook my head. If there's even a chance of salvaging something from this wreck, it's going to take time. A lot of it. An effort from both of us. She inhaled shakily, fingers trembling in her lap. Then, more steadily, she said, I'm willing to try. Whatever it takes. I sighed, dragging a hand through my hair. We'll see, I muttered, more to myself than to her. For now, let's just focus on getting through tonight. Tomorrow, we figure out the rest. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the living room, I retreated to the guest bedroom. The space felt foreign, cold, an impersonal, sterile box compared to the warmth and familiarity of our master suite. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind tangled in endless thoughts of what came next. Could we rebuild what had been lost? Or was this just the slow, inevitable collapse of everything we had once been? Down the hall, Claire curled up on the edge of our king-sized bed, clutching a pillow to her chest like it was the only thing keeping her together. Silent tears streamed down her face as she replayed the day's events, the weight of what she had done pressing down on her like a vice. She had known I'd be angry. But she hadn't been prepared for the depth of my pain. Or for the emptiness in my eyes when I looked at her. Outside, life moved on. Children laughed as they ran through sprinklers, dogs barked in backyards, couples strolled hand in hand down the tree-lined streets. But inside our house, silence reigned. A heavy, suffocating quiet, pressing down on both of us like a storm cloud refusing to break. For now, we were stuck in limbo, caught between the ruins of our past and the uncertainty of a future we could no longer see clearly. One thing was certain, though. Whether we chose to fight for this marriage or walk away for good, nothing would ever be the same again.